Daniel Wong had been gone just 3 weeks, a quick trip to China to visit his parents and catch up with old friends. He left his house in order, bills paid, keys secured. Nothing seemed out of place, until he returned. He pulled into his driveway in the suburbs of Henderson, Nevada. The lawn had been mowed, mail was missing from the box, the lights were on inside. Odd, but not alarming. That changed the moment he opened the front door. Inside his own home were strangers, a couple in their 30s and their young daughter, boxes stacked, furniture rearranged, toys on the living room floor. The woman screamed. The man stood up and shouted, "What are you doing in our house?" Daniel thought it was a prank, until they pulled out documents, mortgage paperwork, signed contracts, title transfer records. They claimed they had bought the house. Daniel never sold his home. What unfolded next was something no homeowner ever imagines: being locked out of your own property. Legally, the police couldn't immediately remove the new occupants. The documents looked legitimate, so Daniel had to prove they weren't. But how do you prove you didn't sell your own house? The deeper he dug, the more twisted the story became. At the center of this chaos was Layla Lewis, the president of the HOA, a name Daniel knew all too well. She'd fined him for leaving a garden hose in his front yard, accused him of having non-regulation window curtains, sent letters, left voicemails, showed up uninvited on his porch. And somehow, she had a spare key to his home. Neighbors whispered about her. She ran the community like a boutique dictatorship, ruling by intimidation and technicalities. But no one suspected she was capable of this. Daniel discovered that during his trip, Layla had forged a power of attorney in his name. That document had given her the authority to act on his behalf. She had listed the house for sale as him, sold it through her LLC, Willow Realty, and funneled the money into an account only she controlled. This wasn't just about Daniel. This was about power, about control, about a woman who had spent years using HOA bylaws like weapons and had finally escalated into full-blown fraud. But Daniel wasn't about to be another quiet victim. With the help of attorney Kevin Adams, he was about to untangle a web of lies that stretched through family ties, forged emails, and a fake sale worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. And when they pulled on that thread, it unraveled everything. This is the story of how one man came home to a nightmare, exposed a criminal empire inside a neighborhood HOA, and helped take down the woman who ran it all. And it starts with a knock on his own door. Before the fraudulent sale, before the forged documents and federal crimes, there was just Daniel Wong and an HOA president who made his life miserable. Layla Lewis didn't start as a criminal, at least not on paper. She was elected president of the Meadow Ridge HOA with little fanfare. A middle-aged woman with sharp suits and a sharper voice, she presented herself as community first. But almost immediately, her leadership turned invasive. She didn't enforce rules, she weaponized them. Neighbors were fined for minor lawn overgrowth, unsightly trash bins, or having wind chimes deemed audibly disruptive. One resident recalled being fined $50 for leaving a holiday wreath up past January 10th. Another was cited for using a non-HOA-approved mailbox color. And in every case, the appeals process ran through one person: Layla. Daniel wasn't spared. From the moment he moved in, he was targeted. It started small: violation notices for his recycling bin, then complaints about the shade of paint on his fence, then a $1,500 fine for excessive weeds. During winter, he contested it, and the board sided with Layla, even though photos showed no violations. There was something personal about the way she came after him. At HOA meetings, she interrupted him. On walks, she watched him. Once, she even accused him, publicly, of running a non-compliant business from his garage. He was a freelance software developer. People joked she ran the HOA like it was a dictatorship. But behind the jokes, there was fear. Layla Lewis held absolute control. Over the years, she'd stacked the board with people loyal to her, or afraid of crossing her. Anyone who questioned her authority was met with fines, threats of liens, or in one case, a lawsuit for defamation. She monitored social media pages, flagged dissenting posts, and once tried to ban a neighborhood Facebook group for unauthorized communication. Her favorite weapon? The HOA bylaws, dozens of pages of legal jargon that she knew inside and out. But more importantly, no one else did. She exploited that ignorance, twisting rules into traps. It wasn't about keeping the community clean, it was about control. Behind closed doors, she had created what neighbors whispered about as a boutique dictatorship. Everything funneled through her: budgets, enforcement, even architectural approvals. And there were rumors. Layla had a list, a mental catalog of residents she didn't like, who she believed were threats to her vision. But the question remained: why Daniel? Some neighbors believed it was personal. Daniel was quiet, independent, and refused to suck up to her like others did. He fought back. He filed appeals. He asked questions in public forums. And most unforgivable to Layla, he won a dispute in 2019, overturning a $300 fine. From then on, the tension escalated. That was when she started appearing on his property unannounced. She claimed she was inspecting violations. One time, Daniel caught her taking photos of his backyard through a side gate. She didn't apologize. She said, "It's my job to keep this place in line." Daniel started keeping notes, dates, times, everything. He didn't know what she was planning. But something felt off. Then, one day, he saw her leaving his property. He was supposed to be at work. She didn't see him. She was locking his front door with a key. Daniel never gave anyone a spare. He had 3, one with him, one hidden outside, and one inside a locked drawer. But one day, he noticed something strange. A light was on that he swore he'd turned off. A window unlocked. At first, he thought he was being paranoid. Later, during the investigation, he'd learned that Layla had entered his home multiple times while he was away. Surveillance footage would confirm it. But at the time, Daniel had no proof, just a gut feeling. Neighbors began whispering. One elderly resident confided that Layla had pressured her to sell her home for the good of the community. Another claimed Layla offered to handle paperwork after her husband passed away. It didn't sit right. There was an undercurrent of something exploitative, predatory. Daniel tried to alert the HOA board, but they were either too afraid or too loyal. He filed complaints. They disappeared. He brought up concerns at meetings. He was gavelled into silence. It all came to a head when he went on his trip to China. So when he returned to strangers living in his house, when he learned there'd been a sale, he already knew where to look. The signature on the forged power of attorney? It wasn't just fake. It was familiar. When Daniel Wong saw the new homeowners standing in his living room, he was stunned, but not speechless. "Get out of my house," he said. But the couple didn't move. "We bought this house through Willow Realty," the man replied. "We have a deed, a mortgage, closing documents. It's ours." Daniel demanded to see the paperwork. The documents looked legit, notarized, dated, signed. The names matched. His signature was on the sale agreement. Only one problem: he never signed anything. Police arrived within the hour, but their hands were tied. The buyers weren't squatters. They had receipts, a signed deed, and access to the property. Technically, they were legal occupants. Daniel was told he needed to settle this in court. He was locked out of his own home, with nowhere else to go and no time to waste. Daniel checked into a hotel. From there, he called the only person he could think of who might understand how insane this situation was. Kevin Adams, a sharp, relentless real estate attorney he'd met years ago through a friend. Adams listened, then asked a single question. "Was the sale through your HOA?" Daniel froze. That was the moment it all clicked. The realty company listed on the documents? Willow Realty, LLC? The listing agent? Layla Lewis. Daniel felt sick. They pulled the records. Everything pointed back to Layla. She had listed the property as if Daniel had authorized it, using a power of attorney. That document granted her the right to sell, sign, and transfer the home on Daniel's behalf. Only problem? Daniel had never given her that power. The POA was fake. Not just fake. Professionally forged. The font, the notary stamp, the signature, all designed to pass a quick inspection. But Kevin spotted inconsistencies. The signature was a copy-paste job from a previous HOA form. The notary's license number had been expired for 2 years. And the return email address on the document? A Gmail address with Layla's initials. They dug deeper. Public records showed the home had been sold just 2 weeks after Daniel left for China. The buyer's agent? Travis Lewis, Layla's nephew. The transaction had moved lightning fast, with no appraisal delays, no escrow holdups, and a near-instant transfer of funds. And then came the bank records. Through subpoenas, they learned that the payment for the home, over $400,000, was funneled directly into Willow Realty, LLC. A portion was tagged as Layla's personal commission. But most of it sat in a business account registered at the same mailing address as the HOA office. The deeper they looked, the worse it got. Layla had access to HOA surveillance footage, HOA resident keys, HOA contact lists. She didn't just abuse her power. She ran the entire operation from inside the system. And the HOA board? Silent, complicit, or maybe just scared. Daniel and Kevin compiled evidence. They brought in a digital forensic expert who traced emails from Daniel Wong homesaleagmail.com. While Layla Lewis strutted around Meadow Ridge acting untouchable, Daniel Wong and his attorney Kevin Adams were quietly pulling every string behind the scenes. The evidence they had so far was already staggering. Fake power of attorney documents, financial transfers to a personal LLC, surveillance footage of unauthorized home entry. But Kevin knew that wasn't enough to stop someone like Layla. Not forever. To fully dismantle what she'd built, they needed more than proof of one fraud. They needed to unravel her entire web. So Kevin expanded the team. They brought in an investigative accountant, a digital forensics specialist, and a retired prosecutor who had worked on HOA fraud cases in the past. Together, they began to reconstruct the timeline, not just of Daniel's case, but every suspicious sale connected to Layla Lewis and Willow Realty. The first thread came from the HOA's own documents. Kevin filed a motion to obtain internal HOA records under Nevada's common interest ownership laws. The court granted access. What they received was over 900 pages of meeting minutes, violation notices, and correspondence buried inside. A pattern. 5 properties, all owned by elderly residents, all cited for vague or exaggerated compliance issues, and all sold within 60 to 90 days of those citations. Each one showed the same chain of events. Violation notices were sent. The resident was summoned to a private hearing, often with Layla as the only official present. Shortly afterward, power of attorney documents surfaced. A sale occurred, with the listing and buyer agents tied to Layla, or her family. One name popped up repeatedly: Travis Lewis, her nephew. He wasn't just the buyer's agent in Daniel's case. He'd represented the buyers in 4 other sales. Even more suspicious, he'd never worked outside of Willow Realty. Kevin subpoenaed Willow Realty's tax records. What they found was staggering: $1.8 million in property sales over 7 years. Yet the company never reported more than $15,000 in annual net income. The money was being filtered, divided, hidden. And then came the hard drive. Recovered from the HOA office during a court-ordered search, it contained spreadsheets detailing foreclosure targets, notes on resident vulnerabilities, widowed, no kids, overseas travel, and a folder labeled POA templates. There were dozens, blank, editable, dated. It was industrial-level fraud. The deeper they looked, the more names emerged: an HOA board secretary who had been signing off on phony violations, a notary public whose expired seal was used again and again, an insurance adjuster who had been involved in at least 2 property inspections leading to suspicious repairs. This wasn't just Layla's game. It was a network, a quiet, well-oiled machine of exploitation. By this point, the FBI had formally joined the investigation. A special agent with the Bureau's Financial Crimes Division began conducting interviews. The buyers from Daniel's case turned over emails from Travis Lewis, emails that instructed them to ignore any future disputes, and that the HOA had full authority to transfer the home. That was key, because now the buyers weren't just victims, they were witnesses. Travis panicked. Within days of being contacted by federal investigators, he flipped. He turned over entire email threads, transaction logs, and even group chat screenshots showing discussions about targeting the wrong properties or waiting until the owner leaves town. In one exchange, Travis asked Layla, "Are you sure he's gone for more than 2 weeks? I don't want to rush the paperwork." That he? Daniel Wong. Another read, "Carl's house is ready. Start the POA process. His daughter's out of state." It was damning. The house of cards was collapsing. Daniel, meanwhile, remained remarkably focused. While emotions ran high, anger, betrayal, disbelief, he channeled everything into helping the legal team. He connected victims, provided records, tracked dates, and documented every step. The hardest part, Daniel later said, wasn't the loss of property. It was the loss of trust. Knowing that your neighborhood leader had turned your home into a pawn in her personal empire. Still, the evidence was mounting fast. Federal agents issued warrants. Interviews turned into depositions. Travis officially entered a plea deal in exchange for full cooperation. The retired prosecutor Kevin had brought in helped frame the case. Wire fraud, mail fraud, forgery, embezzlement, conspiracy, elder abuse, more than 20 counts in total. When Layla was finally arrested, it wasn't at her home. It was during an HOA meeting. She had just finished lecturing a resident about hedge height when agents entered the community center. In front of 24 shocked homeowners, they placed her in handcuffs, read her rights, and walked her out the same door she had used to intimidate others for years. The crowd was silent. Then one neighbor clapped. Others joined. By the time the doors closed, it was a standing ovation. But the story didn't end with her arrest. There were court battles ahead, depositions, civil suits, and, most importantly, a movement within the community to completely rewrite the rules Layla had twisted into weapons. Daniel Wong, once the victim of one of the most brazen HOA scams in state history, was about to become the man who would rebuild it all. Layla Lewis's arrest sent shockwaves through Meadow Ridge. But the real impact reached far beyond a single neighborhood. In the weeks following her indictment, the media caught wind of the story. Local stations ran back-to-back segments on the HOA president who stole homes. National outlets followed. The Las Vegas Review-Journal called it one of the most elaborate real estate frauds in Nevada history. But the headlines barely scratched the surface. Because what Layla built wasn't just a scheme. It was a model. The investigation uncovered that her system was meticulously designed to exploit the most vulnerable residents in the community. Most of her targets were elderly. Several lived alone. Some had illnesses. Others had no family nearby. In each case, she used the same formula: create pressure, isolate the resident, offer help, then quietly take over their property. The foreclosure racket wasn't a side hustle. It was her business model. Layla made herself indispensable. She became the person who signed off on architecture approvals, resolved disputes, issued fines, and sent out all official HOA communication. That centralization of power allowed her to act without checks or oversight. And it wasn't just property. Investigators found she had submitted insurance claims for fictitious damages, authorized inflated maintenance contracts, and pocketed kickbacks from vendors. One landscaping company had billed the HOA $85,000 in 1 year, 3 times the average for similar-sized communities. Everything had been routed through a tangled web of LLCs, family names, and false identities. The FBI had to construct a detailed flowchart just to track the money. By the end of the forensic audit, 5 homes had been confirmed stolen. But investigators believe there may have been more. Some sales occurred years prior, and former residents had since passed away or moved out of state. One such case involved an 84-year-old woman named Joanne Simmons. Her house was sold with consent while she was recovering from surgery. The POA was notarized with a signature that looked nothing like hers. Her son didn't even know she'd moved until he came to visit and found the locks changed. He joined Daniel in pushing for a broader investigation. This wasn't just an HOA issue, it was a warning. With the right paperwork, a trusted title, and no oversight, someone could walk away with your home. The Nevada Real Estate Division launched an emergency review of all licensing tied to Willow Realty and Travis Lewis. Meanwhile, the state legislature began holding hearings on HOA accountability. Advocacy groups pushed for reform, demanding new laws that would limit unchecked HOA power and improve transparency for homeowners. Daniel became the reluctant face of the movement. He was invited to speak on local TV, testify in front of the Oversight Committee, and consult with other HOAs about internal safeguards. He never intended to become an activist, but after what he went through, staying silent wasn't an option. He wasn't alone. Former residents of Meadow Ridge began to come forward with their own stories, not always involving theft, but tales of harassment, fear, and helplessness. A community that had long been silenced suddenly found its voice. And with that voice came change. Within 2 months of Layla's arrest, the remaining HOA board members resigned, a new election was held. Daniel was unanimously voted in as interim president, tasked with stabilizing a community in crisis. His first order of business? Rewrite the bylaws. Gone were the vague clauses that allowed for arbitrary fines. Gone were the unchecked powers granted to the president. In their place, clear policies, transparent appeal processes, and term limits. He brought in a third-party auditing firm, held open forums, made every financial document publicly accessible. For the first time in years, residents felt safe in their own homes. But the emotional cost lingered. Many neighbors still struggled with anxiety. Some had lost trust in any authority. Others were still in legal battles over property titles and financial restitution. Daniel made it a personal mission to support each of them. He visited residents who had been isolated, helped organize a legal aid fund, worked with the local DA to ensure no case was left unresolved. He knew that while Layla had been the ringleader, what allowed her to thrive was the silence. Silence from the board, silence from scared residents, silence from people who saw red flags and looked away. And that was the bigger picture. It wasn't just about fraud. It was about the systems that allowed it, and the courage it took to finally say, enough. Layla Lewis walked into the courtroom wearing the same confidence she'd ruled Meadow Ridge with for years. But this time, the room wasn't full of neighbors she could intimidate. It was a federal courtroom, and across from her sat victims, investigators, and the FBI. The charges were overwhelming. 23 criminal counts, including wire fraud, mail fraud, forgery conspiracy to commit real estate fraud, elder financial exploitation, identity theft, obstruction of justice. Each count carried serious prison time, but even more crushing than the charges was the evidence. Over 3,000 pages of documents, financial statements, forensic email trails, and hours of security footage. Every piece pointing to Layla as the architect of a long-running scheme to steal homes, falsify records, and exploit vulnerable residents for profit. And at the center of it all was Daniel Wong. He took the stand early in the trial, calm, detailed, unshakable. He walked the jury through his experience, from the moment he walked into strangers living in his home, to the discovery of the forged documents, to unraveling the depth of Layla's operation. His testimony painted a picture of not just financial theft, but emotional violation. How do you explain to someone, Daniel told the jury, that your entire life was stolen, not with a crowbar, but with a clipboard? He wasn't alone. Other victims followed. Carl, the widower, Joanne's son, a disabled veteran who had been harassed for months before his house was sold out from under him during a hospital stay. Each voice added layers of damage: financial, emotional, psychological. Travis Lewis also took the stand as the prosecution's star witness. Under a plea deal, Travis admitted to his role in the scheme. He provided internal emails, transaction logs, even audio recordings of planning calls between himself and Layla. In one chilling clip, Layla could be heard saying, "These people don't read their mail. They don't even know what a POA is. We're doing them a favor." The courtroom was silent. For weeks, the trial laid bare how a trusted community figure became a predator hiding in plain sight. Prosecutors argued that Layla used her authority to blur lines between legitimate HOA duties and personal gain, making it difficult for victims to even realize they were being defrauded, until it was too late. Her defense? Denial. Layla claimed she had been set up, that Travis acted on his own, that the power of attorney documents were gifts from residents in need. But the jury didn't buy it. The evidence was too clean, the patterns too exact, the money too traceable. After just 6 hours of deliberation, the verdict came in. Guilty on all counts. The sentencing phase brought even more closure. The prosecution asked for the maximum, 20 years. They cited her years of deception, the number of victims, the abuse of public trust, and the emotional toll on an entire community. The defense pushed for leniency, blaming mental health, stress, and pressure to maintain her role. But the judge wasn't swayed. He described Layla's crimes as calculated, repeated, and devastating in their scope. He called her a parasite who hollowed out the very institution she was trusted to protect. The sentence? 15 years in federal prison, plus $2.1 million in restitution to be paid to the victims and the community. In court, Daniel sat quietly as the sentence was read. He didn't smile, he didn't celebrate. He later said, "Justice isn't about revenge. It's about making sure no one else goes through what we did. The fallout was swift. Willow Realty LLC was dissolved. Travis Lewis was sentenced to 2 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years supervised release. The notary, whose expired seal had been used, repeatedly lost her license and was fined $75,000. HOA reform groups across Nevada cited the case in lobbying efforts. Multiple bills were introduced at the state level to tighten oversight on HOA boards, create mandatory third-party audits, and regulate the use of POA in property transactions. And in Meadow Ridge, the memory of Layla Lewis became a cautionary tale. Her name was stripped from community documents. Her photo was taken down from the clubhouse wall, but the fear she instilled took longer to fade. Daniel helped lead that healing. He made sure every victim received legal support, helped rebuild trust between neighbors, and most importantly, turned a story of betrayal into one of reform, resilience, and hope. After the trial, after the sentencing, and after the media frenzy began to fade, Daniel Wong finally stepped back inside his house. The door clicked shut behind him. Silence. No strangers, no stolen furniture, no fake documents on the kitchen counter. Just walls that had waited for him. But reclaiming the house wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something bigger. Daniel didn't just want his home back. He wanted to restore the community that had been torn apart by fear, manipulation, and silence. And he knew that wouldn't happen overnight. His first step? Holding a town hall, dozens of neighbors came, some for the first time in years. They were angry, confused, relieved, but most of all, they were ready to talk. For too long, people had whispered about Layla behind closed doors. Now they spoke openly. They shared stories of intimidation, fines, threats. Some cried, some apologized for not speaking up sooner. Daniel didn't blame anyone. Fear keeps us quiet, he told them, but truth brings us together. He proposed a full HOA reboot, new elections, new bylaws, new leadership. No one objected. In a unanimous vote, Daniel Wong, once targeted and nearly erased from the neighborhood, was elected as the new president of the Meadow Ridge HOA. He declined a salary. Instead, he used his software background to build a digital portal for the community. It included real-time access to budgets, meeting agendas, voting records, and a public record of every complaint and resolution. Transparency became the rule, not the exception. And it worked. The community slowly healed. Neighbors who had once avoided eye contact started chatting at mailboxes again. Garden clubs restarted. Kids played in the park without parents looking over their shoulders for someone writing citations. Daniel focused on people, not punishments. He implemented a 3-step compassion protocol for rule enforcement. First, a conversation, then a warning. Only after that, if necessary, a fine. Violations were now educational, not punitive. He even invited former board members who had been silent under Layla to rejoin committees, if they agreed to accountability training and community oversight. Some did, others quietly moved away. Meanwhile, Daniel worked with a legal aid organization to help other HOAs across Nevada establish similar reforms. He attended state hearings, gave testimony on how unchecked power can become a breeding ground for corruption, and helped write new policy templates for POA regulations and board member audits. Daniel's experience wasn't just a cautionary tale anymore. It was a blueprint. He received letters from across the country, homeowners facing similar abuses in their communities. They thanked him, asked for advice, shared their own horror stories. He responded to every single one. Back in Meadow Ridge, something else began to happen. Trust returned. At the next annual meeting, attendance doubled. Residents volunteered for positions. A neighborhood watch was organized, not to spy on each other, but to protect each other. Newcomers moving in had no idea they were entering a community that had once been fractured by fraud. All they saw was a group of neighbors working together. And Daniel? He never forgot what it took to get there. In his living room, he kept one framed item. Not a certificate, not a plaque, just a copy of the fake power of attorney that started it all, burned slightly at the edges and mounted next to a simple quote. "Never again. Not on my watch." Justice isn't always about prison time. Sometimes it's about what rises after the fall. Daniel Wong didn't just survive Layla Lewis's fraud, he beat it. And in doing so, helped others find their voices and their homes again. What happened in Meadow Ridge wasn't just a scandal. It was a warning. Layla Lewis didn't wear a mask. She didn't break in through windows or use threats of violence. She used paperwork, she used trust, and she used a title that's supposed to protect communities. She was the face of the HOA, and for a long time, that was enough. Her downfall revealed more than just fraud. It revealed how easy it is for power to concentrate, for systems to go unchecked, and for the quietest members of a neighborhood to be the most vulnerable. Elderly residents, people recovering from surgery, single parents, anyone who didn't have the time or energy to read every legal clause in a 40-page document. What Layla exploited wasn't just the law. It was apathy. But what ended her scheme wasn't just a lawyer or a court ruling. It was Daniel Wong. It was a man who refused to accept the impossible, who didn't back down when he was told, "They bought your house legally," who didn't walk away when the system failed him, but leaned in harder. Because this wasn't just about a house, it was about identity, safety, dignity. And Daniel wasn't just fighting for himself. He was fighting for the people who didn't even know they were victims yet. What makes this story powerful isn't the drama. It's the outcome. A house reclaimed, a fraud exposed, a woman brought to justice, and a community rebuilt from the ground up. Daniel didn't seek revenge. He didn't seek power. He sought clarity, fairness, and safety. And when given the chance, he used that power to uplift, not punish. That's what real leadership looks like. So, if you're watching this, and you're part of an HOA, a board, a council, or even just a small community, ask yourself, who's really in charge? How is power being used? And are your neighbors being heard? Because it only takes one Layla to break a neighborhood, but it only takes one Daniel to fix it. If this story moved you, taught you something, or opened your eyes, hit the like button, leave a comment below, and subscribe for more true stories that matter. Your voice matters. Your home matters. And together, we make sure they both stay protected.